There are a lot of YouTubers who make the sanctimonious statement at the beginning or end of their video, well, if I've helped just one person, then this has been worth it. It's normally about, some incredibly self-indulgent topic, like, well, this video talking about how I finally learned to dye the roots of my hair a consistent blonde cover. If I've just helped one person, it'll be worth it. Talking about my weight loss transformation, whatever it is. There's a lot of this kind of stuff. I've got to say, I find it kind of daunting to make videos that I know will help just one person, because I think a lot of the time the questions or problems I get sent in by just one person are not going to be that relevant to the life and interests of the rest of my audience. It's not going to have the power or educational potential of a more general methodological kind of discussion. But I got a question from a supporter on Patreon. I'm going to skip ahead to the addendum, the very end of the question, and then read you the whole thing. So at the very end of the question, she wrote, postscript. To what extent is this problem, here in a moment, to what extent is this problem a result of my being told that I was pretty my entire life and not asked to do any meaningful self-work aside from physically maintaining my state of being pretty? So she means in her upbringing, this was the emphasis. So I want to jump right in and give a short answer to that. The answer is the same if you met someone who grew up training to be a tennis pro, just playing tennis all the time. And then they ask you, gee, to what extent are my problems, my philosophical or professional or self-esteem, based on the fact that I spent all my time playing tennis? Of course, this is part of the problem or part of the explanation. And again, in both cases, I choose tennis for a reason. It's not entirely bad. I mean, playing tennis isn't evil, isn't terrible. In some ways, it's a waste of time, or it's shallow or meaningless, or it's failed to solve these other problems. But of course, if you grew up, so Melissa's off camera here. I don't know if you knew some people who grew up that way, whether it was ice hockey or tennis or any other physically demanding sport. But there are people who wake up every day at 5:30 a.m. and go to practice, against the hope of being on the Olympic team or the varsity team or whatever it is.
Yeah, despite being one of the best violin players in my orchestra. There was always one girl who was better than me, who was always first chair, because that was what her whole life was. She went on to become a professional violin player.
Right.
So
she woke up and did the scales every day in the vote. So to some extent, musical instruments had that role in your life, or you saw the danger and potential of that, of it, dominating your life. Right.
Musical, other, in choir as well.
So on a mass scale, a lot of women wake up every morning half an hour earlier than they would to do their hair and makeup. They spend a significant percentage of their mental energy and time and money being pretty. Now, I would just emphasize, as with playing the violin or playing tennis, it's not 100% bad. Like, I can't say there are a lot of things. I would openly say if gambling is what you're doing, playing blackjack or poker or slot machine, I think that's 100% bad. It's a pure loss. But I think there's something to be gained or learned from the artistry of makeup or from the physical discipline of playing tennis. However, it is kind of mostly bad or mostly meaningless. I'm not positive about it. Yes, that's how she closed it. Now, here's the first part of her question. She says, I apologize for treating you like a guru, but I'm genuinely interested in your thoughts on this question. As a 24-year-old, so Melissa's now 26. So to say, this question comes from a young woman who's not that far off from Melissa in age. As a 24-year-old, I'm becoming more and more familiar with my perception of the world and myself. More and more every day, I feel as though I have no personality. I feel as though I am entirely just a mirror or amalgamation or permutation of the people around me and the media I haphazardly consume. Every quote-unquote original thought, every seemingly original thought I have, I eventually unearth the true source of, which is not me. So when she thinks about where these thoughts she has comes from, she finds some kind of source of them that she's just repeating or echoing something she's read or heard somewhere else. Her question is it that nothing, not even the self, is ever original, or is it that I haven't lived enough to become a true self? Those are her words. So you can see why she apologizes for treating me like a guru. Just the phrasing here is a bit, It's a bit staying late after yoga class in its in its style of expression. Doesn't mean it's a bad question. So look, first part I want to respond to, again, isolating kind of different bits and pieces of this question. Is originality what really matters here? Thanks to computer databases, we now know it's impossible to play an original game of chess. If you practice playing chess, you become really great at chess, and you go to a chess championship, every single game being played at a chess championship has happened before. Now, if you have an incredibly stupid, incredibly idiotic game by two people who are imbeciles where, the game doesn't make sense, okay, it's possible it's never happened. But the point is there's a limited range of possible moves at each stage of a game of chess. There's a limited number of moves that are strategically valid or viable once you're at a high level of skill. So every game of chess has already been played. Now, it's a real question. Is chess worth playing? Is this a worthwhile use of your time? Is it worthwhile to paint pictures? And especially when you look within one genre, there's a Chinese genre of painting that are just called bird and branch paintings. You can guess what these are painting of. So it's normally a flower on a branch or a leaf on a branch and a bird at the moment of landing or taking off a branch. I can't say if you've seen one, you've seen them all, but if you've seen 100 or 200 of them, you've seen them all. Do you want to dedicate your time to this kind of classical Chinese painting, creating it, or even looking at it? I mean, you can already guess from my tone of voice. I don't valorize these things culturally. It doesn't seem that worthwhile. But is originality what matters, right? I mean, I think that there's maybe an error in the question here, in that she's asking, okay, there's a really meaningful part of this, which is feeling that you're not anybody, feeling that you don't have a self, that you're not generating meaning of your own, you're not creating or destroying something for yourself, that you're merely echoing things other people have done. I understand that. However, the solution to your problem and the criterion you're looking for something real or something meaningful, I think probably can't be originality. But this is, so the person writing to me, I presume she's American. This is definitely an aspect of American culture, because United States of America is a culture where there's very, very little value placed on tradition. So when I was studying Pali, which is an ancient dead language in Asia, a lot of the things I did, which made me a very powerful scholar, in contrast to other people who didn't do this kind of work, it would involve literally copying out by hand manuscripts, repetition, traditional forms of scholarship and learning, that we don't do in the West. Nobody sits down and says, wow, I have so much respect for William Shakespeare, I'm going to write out this play by hand. I'm going to actually study how it's written on that level of actually copying it out by hand, or I'm going to memorize and recite these monologues in, original pronunciation and accurate accent, understand the phonology of it. And anyone could. The irony, you don't need a PhD to do that. You can sit down. It has to do with a respect for tradition and understanding that one mode of learning really is walking in the footsteps of the master, doing something completely unoriginal, completely conformist. But sure, I think we do that, or I as a person, I do that in order to be an original philosopher myself, in order to be a better original political thinker or original writer myself. It's true. I'm creating a basis to do something original.
Right.
But there's a lot of totally unoriginal work, whether it's the artist copying another person's painting or the scholar writing this up by hand or whatever.
Yeah, part of the reason why somebody might read Greek philosophy is to have a better idea for what to say about current politics.
Yep. Yeah, just to have an alien vantage point, but you got to take on other people's.
It is an original look at,
right,
at a new problem using older. And if you don't have that basis, if you don't have the baseline,
right. But look, I think another problem here in the phrasing of the question is that she talks about self-work, which is very American. So she says, to reread, I'm becoming more and more familiar with my perception of the world and quote-unquote myself. Every day I feel as though I have no personality. So that's the big problem here. And then the postscript says, to what extent was this problem created by my being told that I was pretty, that what's important is being pretty, and not to do any meaningful self-work besides maintaining my state of being pretty? But you see, self-work, it's like prayer. It's like meditation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absurd. When you pray, you're not praying to anyone. You're praying to yourself. You're talking to yourself when you pray. Same with meditation. You don't learn anything from prayer. I mean, self-work is not work, right? And all the examples I've just given are work, whether it's copying a painting or studying Shakespeare, what doesn't matter, philosophy, politics, what have you, or actually even playing tennis is work. It's not self-work. So, I think there is something here that comes out of the yoga studio, comes out of watered down white Western Hinduism. Hinduism as marketed to white people, which is also misleading. So, I mean, but your sense of having a personality, my point is, why would that arise from self-work? Why would it be from introspection and not from outrospection, from actually doing things, whether creative or destructive? Why wouldn't it arise from work?
Right.
Yeah.
I get her question, and I can totally sympathize with it.
Did you feel that way at one stage? I mean,
yeah, I think so. And I mean, not to get too personal, but
get personal. Come on, yeah.
Okay, I'll get personal.
Yeah.
When I first got together with you, it was hard to face up to the fact that what I had been doing with my life was who I'd become.
Yeah.
I want to think that I'm this kind of person, but really the kind of person that I was working in a dead-end office job, smoking weed, and just not working on myself. And I felt like veganism was a very positive change in my life, and that's how I found your channel and so on. So that was a big turning point in my life, going vegan. But before that, I can definitely remember how it felt to feel like I have no basis to form opinions about all these things that are.
Well, I think this is a coincidence, because today I was planning to make another video talking about this under a totally different heading. But I think one of the big gaps between myself and mainstream white American English-speaking culture, by the way, this includes Hispanic people and black people for the most part. Like, it's really not exclusively, but this is especially typical of white English-speaking Americans. If you're Quebecois, this probably applies to you. But, this is especially white English-speaking Americans, where they really create a divide between who you really are, your true self, and what you do. What you are and what you do being two very different things. So, I mean, you mentioned that the realization was that what you did with your time is who you are, or had become who you are, or to whatever extent. But, I mean, like, for me, that's very profoundly alien. And it even comes back to the image of the tennis player. Okay, if you wake up and you train like a professional athlete every day, you are a professional athlete. Even if you're an unsuccessful professional, that doesn't mean you're going to win. It doesn't mean you're better than someone else playing tennis. But if you put in 40 hours a week, let's say, training as a tennis pro, then that is who you are. And it's going to have all these knock-on effects, I think many of them negative in your life. Now again, with habits of the mind, this was even obvious to me in Buddhist scholarship. And again, I was always a very kind of secular, nihilistic person. But like, I was waking up early and putting huge numbers of hours into really studying this language. And there'd be people in PhD programs who were amazed, like, oh, wow, you've accomplished so much in 2 years. And by the way, I was simultaneously learning Laotian and had a job and I was doing other things. I was going to the gym too. But it's like, well, what are you guys doing with your time?
Yeah.
They're playing video games and drinking alcohol and chasing whatever. I mean, they're doing whatever it is they're doing. But the point is just, for me, again, I wanted to make another video talking about this. There isn't this divide between who I am and what I do. And for that same reason, I'm not looking for a kind of justification for my identity or self. But a lot of people feel, I've seen this with people who say, like, I am an anthropologist.
Yeah.
I said, what do you actually do? And what have you done in the last several years? Like, do you even read anthropology? And like, often it becomes obvious in the conversation, they're not even reading current publications in anthropology. They're also not going out in the field and doing original research and writing and producing it. But they have this sense, I'm an anthropologist, and the fact that I'm a self-pitying alcoholic, that's just happenstance. That's just something, this is just what I do with my time, as opposed to who I really am. But of course, one of the most common is being a writer, this thing, I am a writer, I am an author. Well, okay, do you write 6 pages a day? What do you do? What do you actually, are you actually living the life of a writer? And I think that can be asked under a whole lot of headings.
Yeah. And after, this, but audience doesn't, that after I graduated from university, I was kind of trying to decide what I would do after that. Should I go on to get a master's degree? And this was part of it. I'm influenced to say this because you just said I'm an anthropologist or I'm a writer. I was trying to give myself an identity then after graduating with a degree in English. What am I going to be now? And I did pursue some education to maybe become something else than a writer, than just somebody with an English degree. But I get, her phrasing was about not having a personality.
Yeah.
I guess for me it was more like struggling with an identity. So I don't know if you really can separate those two, identity versus personality. But like in itself, Netflix or television is not evil. You can use these tools to learn.
Right.
There are plenty of documentaries on Netflix that can teach you something.
Right.
But I think a lot of people use Netflix just for inane entertainment, which I did. Many, many hours just spent, completely wasting time and not addressing the fact that I felt like I didn't have an identity. And that's why, I already said it, but I want to emphasize that when I learned about veganism, that could be something I could identify with, and that was part of my growing identity. I said, okay, now I am a vegan. Like, I couldn't even say like I am a Christian. It's
something you do and it's something you are, right?
Yeah. Right. And I really identify with atheism as a movement, even though I was not.
You happen to be an atheist, right?
God,
right?
So, I mean, I guess as a suggestion, find something that you identify with, and rather than being pretty. But I just want to.
Right. So the crisis is, to be clear, getting to age 24 and feeling like you have no personality and feeling like you have no original thoughts, that everything about you is an echo or regurgitation of some other source. I mean, that's the crisis. And I think the underlying issue is shown by her presuming that the solution is quote unquote self-work, which I don't agree with. I think that's as misleading as thinking that the solution is prayer or meditation or just introspection, or someone said I got to spend more time alone, And for me, it's really the opposite.
I agree. Yeah, and I can remember when I thought this too. I mean, I spent most of my time alone. This is a problem for me that I didn't. My only friend was my ex-boyfriend, or my coworkers, and I didn't really even have coworkers at the time because I just worked for one boss and it was just me.
Right.
So I really don't think that a lot can be. I think a lot can be learned through human relationships. And a lot of progress can be made in your own identity.
And I don't think a lot can be learned from playing tennis, by contrast. Just mentioned before. That's one of the reasons why I'm fairly sex positive and I'm against things like skiing.
Right.
I actually think, again, when you're not talking about prostitution with a language barrier, which is exactly what surrounds you in Thailand, is men paying for sex with prostitutes where they have no common language. Of course, there's not, but most human relationships, dating and falling in love with somebody, but you normally do learn a lot from those relationships. Anyway, just mentioning, in contrast to tennis or skiing, a lot of these things.
I agree with you on that. A question for you that's related to this is: do you think that reading a self-help book is self-work? Because you are reading about
Look, I wanted to come back to what you raised earlier, which is what is meant by personality. So personality in contrast to identity, right? And I think probably what she means here is being the sort of person who has something to assert. Not just who is assertive, but someone who, when talking to coworkers or family members or something, is in effect low-key in a constant state of conflict because they have contrasting views that they want to assert, right? Now, why would that be the case? I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, some of these women I forget about, but there was a woman, a good-looking blonde, my type. I mean, frankly, she kind of looked like you, Melissa. She was. She really had the same sort of very feminine face. But I remember there was this woman who sat down next to me on a bus in Laos. So she was a white blonde woman who sat down with me and started a conversation. And really looking back on it, she probably was interested in getting into bed with me. I was looking back on it, was like, why was I so negative towards her? Why did I completely, shut her down? I had a lot of personality, Like, I had a lot of things to assert, right? Like, is it really positive? Like, I was living in a situation where most of the other white men around me were like alcoholics sleeping with prostitutes. And there's always this sense of asserting that's not who I am. In terms of how I looked, obviously I was younger than I am now. But I was doing 100 push-ups a day, not 200 maybe, and riding a bicycle and stuff. People thought I was in the U.S. military. And I was living in a country that had been completely destroyed by the U.S. military. Laos, more bombs were dropped on Laos than were dropped on Germany and Japan combined in World War II. So it's a country destroyed by American militarism. And people think I'm in the U.S. military, so I have to assert I'm not in the Army. I'm not that kind of guy. And I'm not ex-military either. I'm not pro-American military. I don't support, like in that war, I'm not here making excuses for what the Americans do being good or something. And then even within Buddhism, right? Well, for one thing, most of the Buddhists eat meat and drink alcohol. I don't eat meat or drink alcohol, but I'm not this kind of hippie Buddhist. I'm not cool with any of the bullshit within that religion. So I'm living in a state of many uncomfortable contradictions, and I'm always asserting my personality in contrast to people's expectations of me or the demands they're putting on me. Therefore, I have a personality, right? But it arises through contrasting opposites. It's perceptual, right? Like, also, by the way, living in Laos, people thought I was fat because everyone else is so skinny. They didn't actually use the word fat, but no, I was just considered enormous in all directions. But I mean, these things arise; they're relative, they're contrast. But this is purely, psychological and based on values. It's not based on anything with physical limits like being fat versus being thin. Now, look, what if I had been in a cultural context where I wasn't challenged on those things? How much personality do I really have? I want to conform. I'm a nonconformist because I live in a society that I despise and a society that despises me. And that's not just true of Laos and Cambodia. That's incredibly true of, say, Toronto, Canada. And, again, then there are different contrasts. Like, I'm not a communist. When I grew up around communists. So, this person, we don't know that much about her, obviously. Having a personality, whether it's good or bad, the reality is you would arrive at that point of both being perceived as someone who has a personality and actually being a personality if you get out and do work and, engage the world, even if it's something like you study volcanoes, whatever it is, and then you're living in a context where you have to assert your personality rather than conform to or succumb to things that you despise. So, in a meaningful sense, I think having a personality means living in a constant state of contradiction. Is that people are saying things to you or inviting you to do things even. I would get invited to go and watch soccer, obviously from the British, come have a beer and watch soccer. And I've got to assert back, that's not who I am. This is who like, you think that's who I am. I'm not even insulted. That's not who I am. Or whatever the thing is you're being invited to. So look, I sympathize. I think, she gets the point that we're both saying, sure, if you really don't have something meaningful in your life, you got to take on projects and so on. But probably a lot of what you're thinking about in terms of personality has to do with this kind of challenge, mutual challenge, contrast, and contradiction.